Hello, and welcome to the Pragmatic Live podcast series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Kalogeris, Vice President of Marketing and Sales at Pragmatic Institute, and your host for this episode. The September box of the month is all about events, and love them or hate them, they're an important part of how we interact with the market. Now, maybe for those of you who hate them, it's because you're thinking about the long hours of carnival barking at trade shows or the wasted hours and dollars on trade shows without a lot of ROI tracking abilities. Or maybe we hate them because we're not thinking about them quite the right way. So to help us think about them a little bit differently, we have Georgina Cannie. Hi, Georgina.
Hello.
Hi. So Georgina is an online community builder and strategist. She builds online collaboration spaces for all types of users, from employees and partners to customers and even fellow community organizers. And I always think that's amazing to be a community organizer for community organizers, because talk about people who are judging you. So these spaces allow people to come together and with common priorities and goals. And one other way that she helps expand these are with events. So, Georgina, tell us a little bit more about your background and what brings you here today.
Yes, I am happy to. As Rebecca said, I work in building online communities. And online communities you can kind of think about as a virtual meeting space, a town hall or a town center, right? Where you come and meet all sorts of different people there and exchange information, right? And so this is all happening virtually in an asynchronous environment, right? And so my job is to help build those town halls in a way that is the most valuable for everybody that is participating there, right? So for folks that are listening who don't know what an online community is, I think you do know what an online community is. You just might not have called it that before. So if you want a live example, you can take a look at the Apple forums. So the Apple forums are a product support community where fellow Apple product customers create device solutions for one another, right? You could also take a look, it's a little bit different. It's called the Sephora Beauty Insider community. And so this is a really excellent example of a product marketing community where members are exchanging tips and tricks and reviews about the different beauty and skincare products that they have, right? And so both of those communities are kind of looked to regularly by the industry as ones we really like. So no matter what kind of community you're working with, you are always really going to be moving towards the goal of facilitating everyone there to share kind of their lessons learned, building trust, curating really high quality resources for everybody. And one of the ways that we do that in the community management world is by having online events, right? And so these are always online events, but they might be asynchronous, but they also might be live, right? And so it kind of depends on what you're trying to achieve for your community, right? And there's lots of different, they are events, but they're not your traditional trade show or even necessarily meetup. So they're a little bit more creative.
So just for our listeners, asynchronous, can you define that for them?
Yeah, sure. So asynchronous would be maybe an event in an online chat space that runs for a week, right? And so it does have kind of a defined time period, but it allows participants to span multiple time zones or other commitments that they might have, right? So they can kind of stop in and participate over a longer span of time.
So you don't have to be participating in the event at the same time. It allows you to have sort of communication asynchronously.
Correct. Yeah.
All right. So again, a little bit different than some of the traditional events, but so much a growing part of how we interact with our market and how they're looking to interact with us. So talk a little bit more about some of these types of asynchronous or even synchronous virtual events that you see as part of your community that you've gotten a lot of value out of.
Yeah, happy to. So I think that this is one of the most fun parts of building communities for people, because really what you're doing is you're putting together activities for them, things to engage in, almost like a game, right? And so a popular one that folks might be familiar with more than the others are AMAs. It stands for Ask Me Anything. And generally, there will be one host who is an expert, perhaps a celebrity or high-level thought leader. Maybe they've accomplished something relevant recently. And that person will field questions from the rest of the community for a set period of time. And these have been made popular by Reddit. Reddit's Ask Me Anything, has had some really big guests, right? So they've had Obama and Ellen DeGeneres and, all sorts of different people, right? Another one that I really like, I call a show and tell program or event, often referred to as round robin as well. And so in this dynamic, maybe you would have people on the phone, maybe they would be having it in kind of a chat space, but you suggest a topic, and then each of the participants shares with you an example, a rundown, a mini case study, or even a screenshot, if it's relevant, of the way that they approached that topic, right? So maybe it's win-loss reports, right? We're doing a show and tell of the specific interview questions that we ask, the lessons learned from how we do it, how we have gotten to that space and what we plan to do in the future, right? And all of that is condensed into a 10-minute show and tell. And you kind of go around the group or the small panel that you have. Everybody shares a little bit, right? Another example that's very different, but I like quite a bit, is office hours or a coffee chat kind of thing. An open house, you might call it, right? And so you can title these however you want, but the concept here is that you have a space that you as the facilitator are holding for the group for maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours, and people can drop in and drop out as they please, right? And so for an hour, once a month, once a week, however the cadence plays out, you will be there chatting about whatever they want to talk about, right? And maybe you have a resident expert that's going to be there for that hour. People get to stop by, ask a question, and then take off. Or hang around and vent for the entire time, right? I've seen that too. So lots of different kind of creative ways to think about events.
Great. Okay. So just to clarify before we go any further, do you have to have a community in place to do these type of events?
Absolutely not.
Well, that's a firm, clear answer. I like it.
I am a huge advocate for people taking some of the lessons that have been learned and hard won by community managers and community management professionals and adapting those to their needs as well, right? And so I think that this kind of beg, borrow, steal gets a bad rap, and I think that sharing is caring. So I think that these absolutely apply as approaches and tactics beyond the world of online communities.
Great. All right. So now that anyone can do these, well, not anyone, but can anyone do these?
I think anyone with an internet connection.
Oh, well, well, hopefully that's everyone. Well, it'd be hard to listen if you don't have one, but I guess it's possible. Okay. So I don't need a community. Anyone with an internet connection can run one of these. What should they think about why they run them?
Yep. So I think that the bigger thing to think about is using the right tool for the job, right? So it really depends what exactly you're trying to achieve from this kind of event, right? So, a few different examples of how different kinds of online events will serve different purposes, right? So if your goal was to, make sure you were communicating some real deep accessibility and transparency and authenticity for your brand, a Q&A session, an Ask Me Anything session with your organization's leader, maybe someone in the C-suite, maybe someone who's in a particularly visible role there, is a really great option, right? And I have seen this used as a crisis plan as well, right? It's a crisis response. So maybe there's, a little bit of uneasiness in your market you're trying to quell, or maybe you've just hired a new person in your C-suite and you want to introduce them to the market, right? All of those reasons are really good reasons to choose the AMA session, right? And you can do that via webinar. You could do that via social media site. You could do that via a blog, right? You could have people email in their questions and then type them up and send them out after you collect them all, right? These are all ways that you can do it without having an active online community space, right? One caveat here is that you have to be honest. Otherwise, you shouldn't bother doing it at all, right? So maybe I lied when I said that anybody can do this, because if you're not prepared to be, at least address everything that comes in, then it's a little tricky, because if you market and pitch the event as a candid conversation, you have to prepare your leader who's hosting the event to live up to that, right? So to kind of contrast that, right? Maybe that's not what you want to do. Maybe those aren't your goals right now. Maybe instead your goals are to just generate really deep connections between your customers, right? You want to have some real good loyalty. You want to help them build relationships with you and with one another. For that, I would say that a round robin call is really good, right? That kind of show and tell style call or chats or whatever medium you're using for it, right? And that's really valuable for those goals, because they tend to be smaller events, actually, which makes them less formal and thereby a little bit more intimate, right? And so there's less pressure and more frankness. And that is kind of the recipe for a higher degree of bonding, right? And your knowledge is going to come from multiple point of views instead of the knowledge all coming out of a single host or expert or leader, as with the other example, right? So I think that the high level takeaway here is that you want to first start with what you're trying to achieve, and then get really creative about how you can craft a unique event for your brand that can help you get there.
Makes perfect sense. So I think you're being really clear about thinking about what you're trying to accomplish to make sure it delivers value for you. But you talked a little bit too about the AMAs and making sure that the promise to the market is what you deliver on. What other value, as you're crafting the event, not only knowing your goals, but what should you be thinking about in terms of delivering value to the attendees themselves?
Yeah. So I would say that you want to be really thoughtful about what your attendees' needs are. And so I think that there's no such thing as doing too much prep work. And there's no such thing as being too thoughtful, right? And so if you've ever attended a really fabulous party, right, or live event, or maybe it's a birthday or celebration of some sort, right? Maybe it's a luxurious dinner at a fancy restaurant. Regardless, it was probably effortlessly enjoyable for you because your host or your organizer put a ton of work in up front to anticipate your needs and think about how they could make the best possible experience for you, right? And so you want to really give it the attention it deserves. And this is a little high level. I'll give you an example of this. So when I graduated, my family took me out for a really nice meal to celebrate, right? And we sat down, and the host of the restaurant handed us napkins, and they gave me a black napkin, and they gave my father a white napkin. And I kind of raised my eyebrow, like, why do these people have mismatched napkins? I thought this was a really nice place. What's happening here? And so I asked the maitre d', and he told me that I was given a dark napkin because I was wearing a dark dress, and my father got a light napkin because he was wearing khaki pants. And they didn't want the pill of a contrasting colored napkin to be shown on any of our clothing, right? Which is just an extreme degree of thoughtfulness, right? Something that we didn't even know that we needed that had been solved for us before it even arose, right? And that's kind of an above board extravagant example. These people were really thinking hard about this, but the message carries through that you want to over deliver and you want to surprise and delight as best possible.
Awesome. All right. So we talk about the value we want, the goals, what we're going to deliver to them, thinking ahead, right? Giving them either information they seek or opportunities to interact with people, all of those different things. What other value can these type of events bring either to the attendee or the organization?
I would say that I know that everybody here listening has been to a webinar, and webinars are wonderful, right? They're a really effective type of virtual event. But I know you all have experience with those already, and you all know that your audience has experience with those already. So my big takeaway here is go explore some variants, right? Because that is going to inject some freshness into your brand and the way that your audience is interacting with you, right? And so giving them something that's just a little bit different while still kind of maintaining authenticity and consistency is a huge amount of value to kind of shake things up.
Great. All right. So what are some best practices? We've decided we're going to do an event. We've got everyone on board. We've got people to participate. We know what we're trying to accomplish, what they want to get out of it. What other best practices can you share?
That's a great question. So we touched on a few kind of tips and tricks along the way of chatting about this, but some kind of, key takeaways that I have learned is that overstaffing is always better than understaffing. So you always want to have more people than you really need. And I know that it's tempting to try to kind of do this by yourself, and especially if it's a new kind of creative approach that your organization is taking, you kind of think, okay, let's do a pilot program. But it's easy to cut it off at the knees. So do give it the attention that it deserves. I think another big thing is to hoard up extra content, right? So the big fear is that when you are hosting an event, no one will show up or no one will say anything, and it'll be awkward for everyone and it'll just be really challenging, right? So I spent a long time hosting and supporting hosts of, thought leaders group calls, right? These kinds of panel-based discussions or presentations. And we were always worried that we were going to run out of questions. Like, oh, we have 5 questions to ask people on the call. But what if they don't like any of those? What if we answer all those in 2 minutes and then we have nothing, right? So we would always hoard up extra content to avoid dead air. And we would also put plants in the audience. So you send someone a note and say, hey, I'm running this new program. I need a little bit of help. It shouldn't take too long. Will you attend this event and ask a question or two, right? And people are always very happy to support you. So that's a good way to do it. And then my last big takeaway is to just roll with the punches, because something always goes wrong. Every single time something goes wrong. And so I think that it's best to be prepared to be unprepared, right? And it actually will work out in your favor, because a snafu plus self-awareness equals authenticity, right? And we want to remind people that we're just human. And that's kind of where the trust comes from, and then that in turn encourages the audience and your participants to be a little bit more candid and add a little bit more than they might have otherwise.
But I think sometimes the fear with the event, it's so visible and it feels like it's got to be perfect. So we can almost plan ourselves into a corner, right?
Yeah.
Where it's always on the to-do list, but there's too many open questions. And I think to your point, you just try it and you can open up who you tell about it, right? So you can invite a trustier group of friends first and then make it bigger and bigger as it goes through. And some people love to be on the ground floor of something that, even if it's a little rough around the edges, they can see the potential and they get to feel like they were part of forming it.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that kind of lends itself to, we have a hesitance to ask people for help because we think we're being a burden, right? And saying, oh, would you mind doing me this favor, right? You're kind of going into it in an apologetic way, right? But then on the flip side, if you think about, has a neighbor asked you to borrow a cup of sugar or your lawnmower recently, right? And has a friend asked you to read over their resume, maybe, right? And when someone asks you for a favor like that, do you feel burdened or do you feel kind of special for being asked? Do you feel like you are enjoying the opportunity to be valuable to someone that you care about? So I think that's kind of a deeper idea to remember, is that people like to be asked for favors sometimes, as long as you're not too presumptuous with it. So this is a really good opportunity to test that theory.
Awesome. All right. So we've talked about lots of different things. If you wanted people to do 2 things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, or like sort of the first 2 things you want them to do in live events, what would it be?
The first thing would be creative and get outside of the box. And the second thing will help you do the first, and that's go attend some. Go be an audience member and take some notes, right? And try to dig up some events that are a little more out of the box than webinars. Or live events, right? No one wants any more trade shows than they have to. So go explore some variants and then use that experience of what it feels like to be an audience member to decide what might work for your organization.
Great. All right. Well, Georgina, it was absolutely great talking with you today. I hope people today learned a little bit different about some virtual events, thought of different ways they might be able to think about events and leverage them to meet their own goals and to interact more with the market. And I hope that you will join us again sometime.
Thank you very much. I hope so as well.
All right. That does it for today's episode. Thanks everyone for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.